how's it looking? Welcome back. So if you've seen any of my videos in the past, you're probably aware that I have a Circuit Tracks. It's pretty much my main music production station. Other than my laptop, in terms of electronic music, this is pretty much it. Like, I have drums, I have a guitar, my family has a piano. There's also other stuff that I could do for like acoustic styles of music, but in terms of electronic music, this is all I have. So in this video I want to sort of break down my process for how and why I chose the Circuit Tracks over a bunch of other options. This will sort of go into some of the features and limitations of the Circuit Tracks, but I am planning a full proper review which will probably come out not long after this video, maybe. But this one will hopefully be more general on just how to choose gear that's right for you, specifically for beginners, when it's maybe your first or second piece of gear that you're picking up. As I mentioned, Circuit Tracks is what I've got. Let's start with a couple of different alternatives I could have gone with. So the main one I was considering was the MC101 from Roland. The big things that it has better than this is its sound design capabilities. I think it's a fairly universal opinion that the Zencore engine, which is what's running in the MC101, is just really good. It can create like really versatile synth sounds, and also the MC101 has the capability to do chromatic sampling, which this does not, which means you can take a sample and play it up and down a keyboard, and it's also polyphonic, which means you can play more than one at a time. It has envelopes, I don't know if it has a filter envelope, but it at least has amp envelope, and it has portamento for samples. It has a very versatile set of sampling features, it has a great synth engine. The big drawback is the workflow. Like, it's only got the 16 pads, which is both the keyboard and the sequencer, so you have to, like, as far as I know, you have to like hold a note and then switch a page and place it on the grid. My priority was a lot more on workflow than versatility, so that's probably the main reason I didn't go with the MC101. Another option would have been a bunch of pocket operators. So if you don't know, there's 9 main ones currently, plus there's like, they sort of do sponsorships sometimes where they rebrand one of their existing ones to go with, like, there's a Mega Man one, there's a Rick and Morty one. Anyway, there's like 9 different types of them, so there's like 9 sets of functionalities. So Circuit Tracks went for 700 Australian dollars at the time I bought it, and so with that I could have gotten most of the pocket operators. Obviously the earlier ones were a bit cheaper, so I could have gotten more if I went with those. I probably could have gone with, like, you know, the 33, which is for sampling, 35 for speech synthesis, and like even just the 3 most recent ones, which is those 2 plus the tonic, which is for drums. Even just those 3 would be really great just to combine those. But then also some of the lower end ones just to sort of fill out my selection. Having pocket operators would mean that I can combine just 1 or 2 of them at a time and impose on myself a set of limitations, which could, you know, they say, what is it? Limitations breed creativity or something like that. And I think, at least to a certain extent, that's true for me. But the issue is, stuff like the PO33, you can make a full track on its own just with that. And in that case, it's fine to make a full track. But to combine multiple to make a track together would just be a bit of a hassle. At least as far as I know. So yeah, that's probably why I didn't go with that option. And the third alternative would be the Circuit Rhythm. So just before I was planning on picking up the Circuit Tracks, the Circuit Rhythm came out, and so it took me a little longer to just sort of, you know, choose between them, and I ended up going with the Circuit Tracks. So the Circuit Rhythm uses samples. So if you compare it to something like the MC101, the Circuit Rhythm can play across the keyboard. It can't play more than 1 note at a time, which means that you can't play chords or anything. It has 8 tracks, and each of those tracks can either be, you know, like a drum or a melodic line. You can also switch between samples, so you can have a kick and a snare on the same track. So 8 tracks isn't quite as small as it sounds, but considering you can't play chords, it's still not great. I think part of my logic was just sort of like, well, the MC101 is objectively a better sampler than the Circuit Rhythm, and I didn't go with that, so why would I use the Circuit Rhythm? Obviously the Circuit Rhythm has a very different workflow to the MC101, and now that I'm familiar with the Circuit Tracks and I know how much this workflow works for me, I probably would go back and consider the circuit rhythm more. The other thing is, I don't know if the MC101 can sample directly through a line in. The circuit rhythm can do that, but even then, like, I don't have anything else to sample, so that's not really a significant worry for me. So those are three alternatives. There are lots of others, obviously, but those are the three main ones I considered given the things I wanted. So now I'll just go a bit more in depth into what those requirements were, what were the things I wanted, and how those are present in the circuit tracks. There are 3 or 4 main benefits of the circuit tracks that made me go with it. The first two kind of go together. So first one is the MIDI tracks. So aside from the 4 drum tracks and the 2 synth tracks, there's also 2 dedicated MIDI tracks. So it's got 2 MIDI outputs on the back, so you can control 2 devices. There are 2 dedicated external sequencing tracks. And honestly, as I mentioned, I don't have any other hardware gear, so that's a bit useless to me now. But when I was first buying this, I was also thinking about future-proofing my setup and going, well, if I get more gear and more like standalone synths in the future, I want to be able to combine everything together, and so this having dedicated sequencing makes that very easy. The second feature is the 2 audio inputs on the back. So in the circuit rhythm, the 2 audio inputs bring audio in and sample it. This does not do that. I think it's really cool, and as far as I know, it's a pretty innovative idea, but basically 2 MIDI tracks send stuff out. When you control them, you can take that audio back into the circuit tracks and mix it and apply effects within the device, which means that you have all this external gear, you don't need a mixer for it. As long as you stick within the 2 tracks, you can use the circuit tracks as your mixer. Assuming that you're also using the circuit tracks as the sequencer for those external synths, well then you can only have 2 tracks. So yeah, I think it's really cool, like the way it integrates with external gear, and it basically just makes it part of itself. So it's a really seamless setup. The next thing is the way the circuit tracks handles storage. On the previous model, which is just the circuit, you had up to 64 projects, 64 sounds, and 128 synth patches. So in each project, you would pick your sound, pick your samples, pick your synth patches, and make a project. And then once you reach the limit, you just had to delete stuff and start again. If you don't have a micro SD card, the circuit tracks basically has the exact same storage situation. But as soon as you put a micro SD card in the back, you can basically have a bunch of different entire machine states saved on here. And those are referred to as packs. So you can switch between different packs, which means that you have a whole new set of projects, a whole new set of synth patches, and a whole new set of audio samples for drums, which means that once you reach the limits of the storage, you can just start again, make a brand new pack with the synth patches you want, and you can just continue. The next feature I want to mention is the synth engine inside of this thing. It's a wavetable based engine. Wavetable synthesis is basically, instead of just having one waveform, you have a table of them, and you can scroll through it so the sound can sort of evolve. It has some pretty cool wavetables. You can't like put your own into it, so you have to stick with what they give you. But it's fairly versatile for what it is. Like there are better options, like the MC101 for example, like I mentioned before. For what I wanted to learn the basics of sound design, it's fine. It's more than I need. Like now that I know a bit more about sound design, I can't necessarily just go, I want to make this and make it. There are limits. But for the purpose of learning how to design sounds and then actually being able to use them in a tactile way to make songs, it's great. Okay, so now let's talk about a couple of drawbacks for the device. So the first one is, so as you can see, as you can see, if I go in here, you have your patterns. Oh my god. No. Why would I want that? Thank you. You have your patterns here, and as you can see, there are 4 for each track. You can scroll down and you get another 4. So there's only 8 patterns for each track within a project. A lot of people complain about this, And I just think a consequence of the way I make music is the fact that that doesn't really affect me. I can work within 8 patterns just fine. A lot of people will recommend that if that's a problem for you, you can use project chaining, because when you switch project on the circuit tracks, it syncs it to the tempo, and it also temporarily changes the tempo of the one you're switching to match, so that you can seamlessly transition between them, which means that if 8 patterns isn't enough, you can just switch to a brand new project temporarily. But I haven't really run into an issue with the 8 patterns. The only reason I really use that functionality is when I want to change out the synth patches, because you can't do that within patterns, but you can do that within projects. So that's the only use case I have for project chaining. The next thing to talk about is the sampling limits of the circuit tracks. So, well, no, it's not quite sampling, because the circuit tracks can't sample into it, but like the limits of the way you can manipulate your samples within the device. So in the drum tracks, you have 4 parameters you can control: the pitch of the sound, and it's not quantized. So on the circuit rhythm, you can change the exact pitch to be a specific note. On this, you can just pitch it up and down, but it's not quantized to notes. There is a way to get around that, but it's really finicky, and it's not what it's designed for. And then you can control the decay envelope, the distortion, and a really basic, they call it an EQ, but it's really just a DJ filter. So if I went with the circuit rhythm, I'd get better sampling capabilities across the board. Not only more control over them, but also being able to play them chromatically across the keyboard, which is obviously, that's the point of the circuit rhythm. And like I said before, I haven't really run into anything where I'm like, well, this is impossible on the circuit tracks, and I really wish I could do this. I guess I just, haven't found something that I really want to do that's not possible. I think for my workflow, I'm just fine within the limits of the circuit tracks. And then the last drawback is the effects section. This is not something a lot of people talk about as a limit. It's pretty cool, the fact that you can bring in external stuff and apply effects to it. But when I was looking at it, I kind of thought, well, it's got delay and reverb, and you pick one delay and one reverb for the whole project, and you can apply them separately to each track, but every track has to have the same delay. You could have the kick and the hi-hat be the only things with delay, and everything else doesn't have delay, but they have to have the same delay. So although you can control it to a certain extent, you can't get very much fine control for each track. So I thought that would be a problem, but to be honest, I don't use the effects as much as I thought I would. I think I would probably use it more if it had more capabilities for fine-grained control, but also I'm fine with not using it very much. I think that's pretty much it for this video. I didn't really talk about tips so much as just tell the story of how I chose it. Still, I hope you found something helpful in this. So if you took anything beneficial away from this video, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any comments, feedback or suggestions, make sure to leave them in the comment section down below. And other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!